Hey y'all, welcome back to Right at the Wire. Well, today we're going to be taking a look at the Kentucky Oaks, the race for the 3-year-old fillies at Churchill on Friday. And we're going to do it the same as we did for the Derby. We're going to concentrate on the 4 elements: form, class, speed, and pace. We're going to do a truncated version, though, in just one session. So let's take a look at the field and see what we got. Okay, this is the Kentucky Oaks, Elements of Handicapping. It's an analysis of the contenders for this week's Kentucky Oaks based on the 4 elements of handicapping: form, class, speed, and pace. Number 1 is Mimi Kakushi, the Japanese import, at 20-1. 2 wins in the Oaks Preps over there in Dubai. And from watching both of the races, Mimi Kakushi likes to be up near the lead, likes to basically get on the throat latch of the leader and then wait and make a move. Did so in those 2 races, but did not draw off convincingly. And I'm not really sure who she beats. So that's why she gets a C for form. There's other early speed in this race, which might compromise her chances a little bit. Class-wise, she City of Light and Right Moment, she's going to get the 1 1/8. I don't think that's going to be an issue. For those of you who aren't aware, FF means female family. All the female families in England were numbered based upon the amount of stakes winners they had, so 1 being the best. Over the course of time, it doesn't have quite the same significance as it used to, but you can tell that it was a fairly prominent family from which she comes from. The GSV, or the average winning distance, AWD, is pretty self-explanatory: 7 furlong, 6.8, Siren Dam. GSV is the genetic strength value score. It's basically a numerical representation of the amount of influences from the chefs de race each horse has in their pedigree. They assign point values based upon the generations for the chefs de race. The problem is they haven't updated the chefs de race in quite some time to account for newer, more influential sires like, let's say, Curlin. So the number isn't completely accurate, but if you compare it to the rest of the members of the field, you do get an idea of how classy the horse is. The same can be said for DI and CD. That's dosage index and center of distribution. The dosage index is basically taking the influences of the chef de race and assigning a numeric value to give you an idea of how far they can run, basically. The rule of thumb in the past was anything over a 4 and a horse couldn't get the Kentucky Derby and would have very difficult time around 2 turns. The center of distribution is how balanced the horse is, speed and stamina. So anything around 1 is perfectly balanced. Anything less than that is for 2-turn purposes, the better. These numbers are not completely accurate, so don't necessarily take too much stock in them. I know you pedigree guys want to see them, so I put them in, but they don't have the same weight they used to, let's just say. Speed-wise, we have... but we're going to have the Beyer number, the Brisnet number, and the Thorograph number. For those of you who don't know, Beyer's speed figure is the final time it's a measure of. Brisnet number takes pace into account to arrive at theirs, and the Thorograph is kind of a universal measuring stick. It accounts for everything that happened in the race, whether it be bias, beaten lengths, wind, track condition, equipment changes. It's a very comprehensive number. The lower the number, the better. So if you run a 0, you ran an excellent race, and anything in the negative numbers is like Flightline or Secretariat, put it that way. So at 8.1 is the only number we have for Mimi Kakushi, and that's in this field is one of the lower Beyer numbers. So speed-wise, I have a feeling that she might have a difficult time measuring up with these. We've also done the pace numbers, and you can see she gets a C-. So let's take a look at those. You can see 1FR, 2FR, and 3FR. Those are the first, second, and third fractions of each of the races from which she ran. Now, I didn't have the exact fractions, so I had to hand time it. And basically what I did is I took the metrics and converted it into feet and then timed it by hand. So these are not accurate numbers. They are merely approximations. And so from those, I think you get a pretty good idea of how this horse can run. If you look at the UAE Oaks, you see in the first call at 50.60, which is feet per second, by the way. That's a pretty slow first fraction. The second at 54.7 is moderate, and the 52.77 at the end is borderline. And you can see she was allowed to run at a fairly soft pace early on and make her move late. So that is, I doubt she's going to get that kind of pace scenario in this race. There's other early speeds signed on. Then we have our pace parameters. We have EP, which is the second pace call for route races. So that's 54.7 from the UAE Oaks. And then AP is average pace, and SP is sustained pace. And sustained pace is basically a measurement of how the horse carries their speed throughout. And what you do is you take the EP, which is the second pace call, add it to the third, divide by 2, and that's your sustained pace. The average pace is taking the EP and the SP, adding them together, divide by 2, and that's your average pace. So the average pace is the average amount of pace throughout the race. The sustained pace is how they carry it. From those and from the fractions, I've prorated it to show you what a 1 1/8 time would look like for Mimi KAKUSHI. I would consider anything between 151 and 149, or between 148 and 151 to be competitive and to be a fairly substantial time in the Oaks. You can see here 153 and 4 is pretty slow, and so consequently I don't think this one's going to factor in the race, and she's a toss. The ALYS Look won the Fairground Oaks, but it was a 5-horse field, and it was marred mainly because Hoosier Philly kind of bombed out and disappointed again. It was a halfway decent field, but ALYS Look really didn't factor in it whatsoever. It was in the back of the pack most of the time. Not a very good performance going into the Oaks, in my opinion. The Silver Bullet Day kind of compounds that, because all she beat was Chop Chop, and Chop Chop, while being a prominent filly early at 2 years old, really didn't do anything at 3. So that's not flattered whatsoever. So this one, form-wise, I'd say is a B-. Did get a win, but and did get third in the Oaks, but I don't think that was really very competitive effort. So a B-. Class grade, Curlin Harlan's Holiday, all the pedigree is there. This one's going to get 2 turns. I'm not worried about that. If you look at the speed grade here, and I think speed is the most important factor in this year's Oaks. It's the best measuring stick. You see, a 75 buyer probably isn't going to cut it in this race, nor is an 80 Brisnet figure, but the Thorograph isn't bad. That's a 5.1. It's halfway decent in this field, but I'm really thinking more that the form isn't there based upon the last race, and I'm not quite sure this one stacks up with the better in this field. If we look at the pace numbers, that's kind of borne out by the fact that you look at the Fairground Oaks, her early fractions have been increasing, so she's running a little harder to stay up. The problem is her last fraction isn't following with it. It's kind of staying the same. And, I mean, it looks like it's progressing a little bit, but 49 isn't going to cut it for a 2-turn race. And so, consequently, you can see that her prorated 1 1/8 time is not very good, and that's why I think she's a toss. Oh, and incidentally, I didn't mention, when you look at the AP and the SP numbers, any horse that leads in both categories for a race usually is the winner. Not always, but with the horses with more prominent AP and SPs, like the top 5 in this field, I think that's a good thing, and you want to take that seriously. Gambling Girl has a big problem. She is like Red Route 1. She comes from the clouds. She has no early turn of foot whatsoever. She's very slow to get going. Consequently, she's at a major disadvantage. Now, she's going to have a little bit of pace to run to in this race, but she really hasn't been able to put it together. And much like Red Route 1, her form screams second instead of first. She got a second in the Gazelle, and that was on a speed-favoring track, so that is to her credit. But she could not get to the leader. None of them could. A Colt or anybody. It was like a force field around her. So it gives you an idea of the bias. But She is improving, and that's important. So form-wise, she's coming in pretty good. Her running style is really the big problem. Class-wise, I'm not sure she measures up with the better horses in this race. But pedigree-wise, she should get the 1 1/8. That's not going to be a problem. And you see a pretty high genetic strength value score. So there's some class here. Speed-wise, she got an 81 buyer, which is a bit of a cut below the best here. Her Brisnet was very good, however, at 98. But the Thoroughgraph was not. 7.2 is subpar. So it's possible this one's going to make a move forward, but I'm not sure it's going to be good enough. So I think under is more likely for this one. If you look at the pace numbers, it's kind of, you can see the improvement from the Busanda to the Gazelle. Her final fraction is getting better each time. The problem with that is her early fractions are decreasing. So it's taking her longer to get going. That third fraction of 54.39 is outstanding. And if she could get more engaged in the race and run a little bit more early, that fraction would become really important. The problem is she just doesn't. So I think under only is the limit with this one. And, you know, while her AP and SP are pretty good, I think her running style really hampers her. SOUTHLAWN, excuse me. SOUTHLAWN just ran her best race. Won the Fairground Oaks, and you got to love that. And so she's coming into the race in really good form and improving. Class-wise, she's got great pedigree, and everything stacks up. I think she measures with to be competitive in this race. Speed-wise, that was a nice figure she ran, and you can see it was good on the buyer and the Thoroughgraph. And Brisnet, it was okay, but the Thoroughgraph, I think, is the important determinant in this race. And that 4 was a good race, but I have a little bit in my mind that she's going to regress from that, because I believe she paired it from her prior race. And a lot of times when that happens, you can get a fallback. So I have a little bit of a concern when it comes to that. If we look at her pace numbers, you can see her third fraction is getting better, and so are her early fractions. So she's carrying her pace longer, her speed longer, which is good. And she's got a competitive prorated time. And I think she's a use for sure, particularly because she has one of the faster last buyers in this race. I'm just worried that she might regress from it a little bit. That's my only concern. So I think under is more likely. Wonder Wheel was the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies champion again, but she beat what most considered to be a pretty subpar group of fillies, and really hasn't got much better this year. There's still kind of a subpar group. She has not built on her 2-year-old form at all, really. Now, she got a decent second in the Suncoast, and she was fighting a speed bias. And again, it was another case. They couldn't get to Dreaming of Snow. They were closing. It looked like they were going to overtake her, and they just couldn't because the speed bias was pretty heavy. She got a second there, so that was a decent effort to start the year, but followed it up with a pretty lousy effort in the Ashland. I mean, she was just backing right up and didn't factor at all in that race. She tried to, but just couldn't stay with the better horses. So her form is a little suspect right now, and I'm not sure she's improved on her 2-year-old form. Getting a 75 buyer is a pretty low number. It won't stack up here. Consequently, that's why she gets the C-. And a 9 Thoroughgraph means it isn't good at all. So I think this one is you know, really isn't stacking up with some of the better horses here. I kind of think you have to toss. Pace-wise, she's getting a little better, but it's just not good enough. That's really the bottom line to it. She is carrying her speed a little bit better, but she doesn't have enough, and that's really the problem. So she's a toss. Botanical, we don't really know, do we? I mean, she's been running on synthetic or turf, never on dirt. Couple back-to-back wins. Winning on the front end on synthetic is not easy, so that is a feather in her cap. So for that perspective, she gets a B+ form only because it's not an A because she wasn't on dirt. Class-wise, I think with Medaglia d'Oro on the top and Blame on the bottom, she certainly has the class to stay in this field. And I think she should be able to get the dirt with that kind of pedigree. I'm not totally concerned about that, just a little bit. Speed-wise, it's all on synthetic, so we don't really know how it stacks up. I will say this, though. While she got a 90 Beyer and a 94 Brisnet figure, 6.2 in the Thoroughgraph's a little low. And there's others who recorded much better numbers, so you want to be keeping that in mind when you consider this one. The pace-wise, don't forget, on synthetic, it's easier to have a better late fraction. So those are good late fractions, but notice that her pace numbers early on, she was kind of allowed to get on a soft lead and carry it all the way through, kind of like Kingsbarns in the Louisiana Derby. So she did draw off in those, and I think she's got a little more in the tank. And I think we got to use her for sure. But just a little thing in the back of my mind that maybe those numbers are a little illusory given the fact that they were on synthetic. Wet paint is your obvious favorite and a definite win candidate. Hasn't done anything wrong. The only question we had was whether this horse could run on a dry track and prove that in the fantasy one handily. So Form A, class-wise, Blame on top, Street Crown the bottom, no problems there. Has been competitive all year in this group. Speed-wise, gets an A, red an 89. That's one of the top buyers here. Decent Brisnet figure and a really good Thoroughgraph number. So she checks all the boxes when it comes to speed. Pace-wise, it's kind of interesting that she sort of one pace. She runs kind of the same way all the way around the track. But that last fraction, particularly in the last race, you can see was really solid. 53.83 is an outstanding third fraction. So I think it's all looking good for this one, and I think is a definite win candidate. She's going to be coming from off the pace. We know this. But I think she's got enough class and enough talent to overcome any pace issues there might be. PROMISEHER America was the pace in the Gazelle I mentioned when it came to Gambling Girl. They just couldn't get to her. And she just took advantage of the speed bias at 26-1 and wired a field. Occult was a pretty good horse in that race too, and they couldn't get to her. So form-wise, she's coming in pretty good. She had a win right before that as well. Class-wise, not sure amongst the very best fillies that she's competitive, but see, I think the Gazelle was a pretty good indication that maybe she can hang with them. Her pedigree is 2 turns. We're not going to worry about that at all. Speed-wise is another story. She got an 82 Beyer, which is pretty good in this group. Her Brisnet figure was outstanding at 99. And I think it's mainly because she wired the field and was able to do so with a pretty steady pace all the way around. The problem is her Thoroughgraph number is a little light. And so this one is, you know, it's kind of hard to know exactly what to do with her. If you look at, I didn't want to do that, but if you look at her pace numbers, when I get back to it, I'll show you. Sorry about that. You'll see that she's one pace all the way around the track, 53s all the way around. And I doubt she's going to be able to get it that soft in this race, and I doubt there'll be a speed bias. And Churchill Downs tends to play pretty fair. So I think on the surface, it looks like she might be fairly competitive, but I think that Thoroughgraph number kind of indicates that speed-wise, when challenged, she might wilt. I'm on the fence with her a little bit because if she is that kind of one pace, she might be able to stay in the race. And at 30-1, that's a pretty good value. So from that perspective, you might consider using under. And Tell Me No Lies, I've always liked this filly. She's a tough, hard knocker, but she's just not good enough. That's the bottom line. She was running out in California, and she hasn't built – her 2-year-old form was pretty good going into the Breeders' Cup, but she hasn't built on it and seems to be at the same level. She's got 2 seconds in a row. It's at Santa Anita, both behind Feza, who she was no match for whatsoever. She always brings her A game. She runs. Her A game isn't good enough, though. That's why she gets a B. She's a cut below. Speed-wise, a 78 buyer really isn't going to cut it here. It's a cut below. And more telling is that 8.2 Thorograph, which is really mediocre for this group. Pace-wise, you can see that her third fraction is dropping, and it may be just being at a distance she doesn't want to be at. I'm not so sure about that. But the bottom line is I just don't think that she's good enough to compete. However, because she runs from behind and because she's scrappy, you never know. She might be able to back her way into fourth or third or fourth. And I'd like to get a little better price than 15 to 1 if I was going to use her. Flying Connection was out in New Mexico at Sunland and won a couple of Oaks preps. One basically wire-to-wire in the Sunland Oaks and a little bit off the pace in the Island Fashion, I believe. So gets a B- because she did win both of them. However, I think it's fairly certain she's a cut below class-wise, and that's why she gets the C+. I'm not sure who she was beating out there. From a speed perspective, an 85 buyer is pretty good. It's one of the better ones in this field. The problem is she got a 9 on the Thorograph, and that's really telling. And it means she didn't have to beat very much, and she also didn't have to run very much to win. So I think that's the one we go by. So for speed, she's a C-, and I think she might have some trouble here. Pace-wise, if you look at the Sunland Oaks, a 50 on the last fraction won't be good enough. And you see her fraction, she was running probably at the pace level she's going to get here, maybe. There just wasn't anybody out there to go get her. In this race, there are. So I tend to believe that she'll be up the track. And if you look at her prorated mile and an eighth time, it looks pretty good, but the pace numbers say otherwise. At 46 and 111, if she runs that pace in this race, I think that she'll be cooked. So she's a toss. Defining Purpose ran a really nice race in the Ashland, and it was sort of the culmination. This one's been, had some good results early, but also had some kind of funky ones in the middle. Kenny McPeaks, we know, get a little better every start, and I think it all came together in the Ashland. And so form-wise, she looks pretty good. Class-wise, I think she can run with the better horses. That's a grade 1, so she fits. Gets a minus just because I'm not sure that she's a real solid win candidate for the following reasons. Speed grade is an A-. 85 was her career high, and it's a great, the 98 was a really nice Brisnet number. The Thorograph was good too. The problem is it's higher than anything she had run before, and generally when that happens, you get a regression afterwards. And that's the only thing I'm really kind of concerned with. I like this horse, but I'm worried about that. If you look at her fraction, she's improving with every single race incrementally, and you got to love that. And her, if you prorate out her mile and an eighth time, that's very competitive. Just worried a little bit about regression, but I think you can definitely use this one. DORTH is the easiest toss in this group. Doesn't want 2 turns. It's that simple. By Gervin. Gervin gets sprinters. She's proven it. Devona Dale, awesome at 46 to 1, 1 turn. Gulfstream Oaks, 2 turns, not so good. She got to the top of the stretch, looked like she wanted to move, and then just ran, hit the wall, and I think that was pretty telling. 77 buyer isn't going to cut it in this race, and the 7.3 Thorograph really isn't very good either. So form-wise and just the fact that she's not going to want the distance, you see a marked difference in pace numbers, particularly from the Devona Dale to the Gulfstream. You see that third fraction dipped considerably. And I think that's an indication this one just doesn't want 2 turns. Easy toss. Affirmative Lady is a fighter, and she won the Gulfstream Oaks and has been competitive throughout. She was running in stakes races before she broke her maiden, which is kind of funny. We'll see that in a second. So she gets a B, and mainly it would be higher, but she just seems like a cut below. Speed-wise, she got an 81 bar, which is okay, but it's really not good enough against this group. It's a cut below. But the real telling thing is she got an 8.2 Thorograph, and that's like the 3rd worst one in this group. So I really wonder about her ability to run with this group speed-wise. I think class-wise it is a little questionable because of that as well. If you look at her pace numbers, you'll see you can almost draw a line through the maiden because she was running against non-winners. But in her stakes efforts, you see her final fraction is increasing a little bit, as is her first fraction. So she's carrying her speed better. And that means that she's moving forward. The problem is I think she's a little light when it comes to facing the better horses in this race. And so I think another move forward is possible. And if you want to use her under, I wouldn't blame you. I think 10-1 is a bit of an underlay. So I'm kind of on the fence for tossing her. Just not overly certain either way. Pretty Mischievous has been, you know, competitive all year in the stakes efforts. I'm not sure how good those Fairgrounds Oaks preps really were, if you look back on them. But she hasn't done anything wrong. She's won 2 wins and a second for this year, had a third in the Goldenrod last year. So A- for form. Class-wise, she's regally bred. The one ex-female family is the Latroyen family. It's one of the most influential in all of breeding. Forte is a member of the Latroyen family, as well as several Derby winners and a lot of classic stakes winners. It's a really awesome family. So that's not a problem. Speed-wise, an 81 buyer is a little light for this group. But interestingly enough, her Brisnet number wasn't so great either, but she gets a 4.2 in the Thorograph, and that's one of the highest. So all things considered in how she's running, she matches up speed-wise, so we have to consider her for that purpose. The only thing that concerns me is the pace, and if you look at it, you'll see her third fraction is fairly light, and it's particularly glaring when you see it moving from the Rachel Alexandra to the Oaks. It dipped, and her early numbers are getting. She's running faster early, but not keeping up late, and that's a bit of a concern. That may mean the distance is getting a little much for her. No, it shouldn't be, but sometimes pedigree doesn't say everything, and it may be the class of horses she's running against. I'm not sure, but the Fairgrounds Oaks wasn't the greatest of races either. So there's some concerns with this one. I tend to believe that this one can be competitive in this group and may tactically have a decent position running behind the early pace. What I'm worried about is the bottom end, and if this one is able to finish and be competitive, and I'm not so certain. But is an underfinish possible? Yeah. So what I've done is I've summarized the pace and the speed parameters. Now, if you look at the pace numbers, I just listed them by post position, and I highlighted the leaders in the average and sustained pace, AP and SP. Now, we don't have a leader in both together, but we have a top 5, let's say. You can look at, and you'll see it's not necessarily telling in this race, I don't think, but you got Mimi Kakushi, Gambling Girl, Wet Paint, Promise Her America, Defining Purpose, and Affirmative Lady. Those are the tops. But as we noted, I think speed is the more defining characteristic in this race. And what I did with speed is I ranked them from top to bottom to give you an idea of what the difference is. You can see Wet Paint and SOUTHLAWN are both at a 4.0, and their numbers are stack up pretty well. Pretty Mischievous is a little strange to me at 4.2, but she's in the top 3. And you look, and it really, once you get past the ALYS look, then you start seeing that drop off, including Botanical. So really, that's, I think it maybe has to do more with the synthetic than anything else. But it's a little concerning if you're a backer of hers, and you see the drop, and you go all the way down to Wonder Wheel and Flying Connection with 9s. So I think speed is the determining factor in this race. So I think that's from that perspective, you want to be thinking of who the fastest horses are in this race. So we look at so if we finally assess it, here's the ones we're going to use. And it basically, again, speed and more the Thorograph numbers are the determinant for me. I consider them to be the most reliable. So we would use Gambling Girl under only based upon her late running style and her inability to get going sooner. SOUTHLAWN, Botanical, Wet Paint, Defining Purpose, and Pretty Mischievous. I think they all have the speed numbers to make them competitive in this race. The second part of our analysis is we have some that are on the fence. We're not sure whether we want to use them or not, and then just outright tosses. The ones that we're going to toss outright are Mimi KAKUSHI, The ALYS Look, Wonder Wheel, Flying Connection, and DORTH VADER. We're not using them under any circumstances. Then there are ones on the fence. These ones, it's conditional, and it'll depend on odds more than likely, and what are looking at the tote board, and maybe a feel we get for how the race is going to be run. And they would be PROMISEHER America, and Tell Me No Lies, and Affirmative Lady. And that's basically the way we see the Oaks. So I think the speed figures point out a pretty significant gulf in the field, and I think there's either the ones who can run the race, and then there's others that can't. And it's pretty telling. I thought it was by the speed figures, and hope our analysis helps you in making your own determinations. But it's an interesting race this year. It seems a little top heavy. We'll have more coverage later this week concerning the Derby. We'll maybe have a posting concerning some betting strategies on maybe how to attack the Derby. And we're also going to take a look at the undercards for Friday and Saturday, and usually there's some pretty good opportunities. We'll see if we can come up with some potential sequences to see if we can max out our earnings. If you like what you see here, of course, please like and subscribe, and we thank you for coming by. And I love the comments. Keep them coming. I love to hear from you guys, and it really does help. Makes for an enjoyable experience, and I hope you're enjoying being a part of this community. So we'll be talking to you later this week. It's a busy one. We're getting closer, so let's just all hang in there until I talk to you again. Be well.